check, check.
Is this?
There you go. And just hand that back.
Thanks.
Everybody ready?
Good afternoon. My name is John Horn. I'm the host of The Frame on KPCC. Thank you all for showing up and for joining us online. For those of you who are not here physically, we're live at the Egyptian Theater in Park City, Utah, and it is the start of the 2017 Sundance Film Festival. For those of you who have attended this event in the past, we're doing something a little bit different this year. I'm going to lead a conversation with a couple of Sundance Lab alumni and Robert Redford. We'll take a little break. We'll bring up John Cooper and KERI Putnam, who run the festival and Sundance Institute, and Bob to have a Q&A with them with audience questions. So we're going to plunge right into it, I think. So Bob, I'm going to start with you. I was lucky enough to spend a couple days this summer at the Sundance Lab, not far from here, and I learned a couple of things. And one of the things I learned is that the Sundance Lab preceded the festival by, I think, 5 years, and that the festival is in some ways an outgrowth of what happened at the lab. So I want to rewind the clock to the founding of the lab itself and what was the motivation for it, and then we'll get to these filmmakers who went through it and get their stories. So if you could talk a little bit about the founding of the lab and what was the motivation.
Okay. Well, it started, I was in the mainstream, that's all there was, the mainstream film business. It seemed to me at a certain point that there were a lot of stories that were not getting told, and filmmakers that were not being seen. They were out there, I could sense that. And I thought, well, maybe we can broaden the industry by just adding to it independent film and create a space and a place for new artists to have a place to come and develop their stories so they could at least get their films made. And it was nonprofit, so we were restricted on the back end. And to get it going, I felt, because we were starting from scratch, and you know, a startup is always hard. And I didn't feel that I could get any financial support because I thought too many people would think, well, he's making all these big movies, why doesn't he just pay for it? And I felt that I didn't have the credibility to get it going, that I needed some kind of imprimatur. So I went to the National Endowment of the Arts, and I went to Brown and Doherty, and I asked him if he would be willing to give us a grant just to get it started, because I thought that that had the identity of the NEA was strong enough that it would be a good shield for us to go forward. So we did. He gave us $25,000. And that's how we started our lab. And the reason we put the lab at Sundance, which is about 40 miles from here, is that I couldn't afford to do it in an urban environment like New York or LA, which is what you would probably think it would be. I could only offer the property that I had in the mountains. But then I thought, well, maybe something interesting can happen when you put art and nature together, and we'll see. So that's how it got started. And the idea was, going through the lab process, it was going to be like tough love. I would ask colleagues of mine who were in the business, writers, directors, actors, cinematographers, editors, would you be willing to come and give up your time a couple of weeks in the mountains and work with these novice filmmakers to help them develop their stories? So they did, which was a blessing, and so that's how it started. But the idea was it was going to be really like a bit of a boot camp, that they were going to come through this and we were going to be pushing them to tell their stories. Like, what is your story? What is the story you want to tell? And at that time, we also were kind of almost under siege by what new technology was bringing into the film business. It was creating ability to have special effects and so forth. And so a lot of the young filmmakers were focusing on special effects to tell the story. But what was missing was the story. So we decided, okay, then we're going to stay focused on the importance of story. And as things go along, as they go through this process, it's going to be hard on some of them. They're going to have fixed ideas in their head about telling their stories that may not be right. And we're going to have to show them that and force them to really understand the story that we're trying to tell. And so that meant a lot of people were going to crash and burn and cry and maybe leave. I just hope they all didn't leave. But it worked. I mean, it was tough, but it worked out. And so finally, it succeeded to the point where I thought, okay, well, I guess this is to feel good about. We've succeeded in creating a space for these people to tell their stories, but there's nowhere to go, because the mainstream control the exhibition spaces. So that left only one. I thought, well, maybe we can have a festival. Maybe we can have a gathering of filmmakers where they could all come together and tell their stories to each other, at least share their stories, and maybe create a community of artists. And I couldn't do it at Sundance because we didn't have a theater then. And the closest was Park City. And in those days, in 1985, they had just one theater, the Egyptian, and maybe 4 restaurants in town. It was pretty low-key. It was a ski resort. So at any rate, we were able to use that theater, and that's how the festival got started. And from that point on, I think it kind of speaks for itself.
Sydney Freeland is the director of Deidra and Laney Rob a Train, which is playing at the festival this year. Sydney, you heard Bob talk about tough love, about it being hard, about there being tears, about there being failure. You were at the 2009 Native Lab and the 2010 Screenwriters and Directors Lab. I want to ask you about your experiences of the lab and the tough parts, the hard parts, and what you learned from those challenges and what you learned from being asked to fail rather publicly.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely true. I remember crying during the festival. And it's funny, they tell you like beforehand, they're like, oh, find your place for your cry. And I was like, I'm not gonna cry. You know? And then of course I cried twice. So, but no, I think what's important about the labs is they target a sort of the individual filmmaker's comfort zone, and they try to push you out of that, you know. And so I think an example of that was, I remember working with a mentor of mine, Joan Darling, and I went in with my first feature, Drunktown's Finest, and my approach at the time was to storyboard everything. You know, like I would storyboard, like even if it's an over-the-shoulder conversation in a coffee shop, like I would storyboard that. And so I remember in the labs shooting a scene, and I was standing in front of the monitor, and I had my storyboard in front of me, and I was preoccupied with lining up the storyboard with the monitor. And Joan Darling comes up and she takes the storyboards away from me, and it was like my security blanket, you know. So I'm like, no, please come back. And Joan says, you know, like, look at what's in front of you. You have these 2 actors in front of you, and there's so much going on, and they need your attention. And it was small, but it shifted my entire approach to filmmaking. You know, like in terms of like being able to interact, you know, from a story standpoint, from a performance standpoint, from an actor standpoint.
And would you say that's a lesson that you apply to not only Drunktown's Finest, but the movie you have here this year?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it completely shifted my approach.
I worked with Sydney on that project, and she was very raw and undeveloped at that time. But what I felt was I could really feel a strong talent and a strong mind with its own point of view. Aside from that, she was filling in another slot that we had put in the labs for a long time, and that is creating a space for Native Americans to come to the lab. And for many years, no one came until Chris Ayers came. So now Sydney comes, and she's able to fill that slot, which excited me. And also she was going to come and tell a story about that part of the world that a lot of people don't know about, but it has a lot to do with Native American issues. And she was telling it in a raw, tough way. And as I was working with her, I thought to myself, you know, this is really why we're here. This person is really, really talented, and she has her own unique point of view. And whatever we can do to help her tell that story the way she wants to tell it, then that's a success for us.
And if I can just speak to the other side of that conversation as well. I mean, you know, I'm Native American, and I grew up on the Navajo reservation about 5 hours south of here. And so filmmaking isn't something that even exists back home. And so, you know, I think it's, you know, the fact that Bob created a program specifically for Native American and Indigenous filmmakers is the reason I'm here, you know, so I'm very grateful for that.
David Lowery is the writer-director of Ghost Story, which is in this year's festival, but he also has another film that he wrote called Yellow Birds. David, you were at the lab in 2011, in the screenwriting lab, with your script for Ain't Them Bodies Saints. We should also explain that one of the ideas of the lab that continues to this day is that you are advised by veteran filmmakers, and the fellows often return when they become veteran filmmakers, that Quentin Tarantino has returned as an advisor, Paul Thomas Anderson has returned as an advisor, Ira Sachs has returned as an advisor. So when you were working on Ain't Them Bodies Saints, can you describe the relationship between the fellows and the advisors and what you took away from it?
It's a really wonderful relationship. There's a lot of a give and take, I would say. I think I would guess that most of the advisors find it as engaging and as lightning and as helpful to them as it is to us, the mentees. It's a really wonderful, symbiotic relationship, I think. But for me going in there, I really felt a little overwhelmed at first because I was sitting down with all of these professional screenwriters who I admired and whose work I admired and who had influenced me as I was growing up as a burgeoning filmmaker. And so you go in and you sit down with them and you spend an hour or 2 hours with each one of them talking about your script. And naturally that sometimes takes a form of them giving you advice. Or it's never prescriptive. It's never like, here's how to fix your script. But their perspective seeps into those conversations. So over the course of a week, you wind up with all of these different perspectives on your script. And one of the most wonderful moments of clarity I had at the labs was realizing, like, wait, I don't need to try to do all of these things that we've talked about. These perspectives all come together cumulatively to help me figure out what I want to do with my script. And it really just everyone's shining a light on a different aspect of it from their own point of view. But the important thing is for me to find my own point of view on it. And it's easy, not just at the labs, but in the filmmaking process, to lose your point of view. Like, you can lose that so easily. And learning how to maintain that, how to find it, and then to maintain it was one of the most wonderful gifts that the labs gave me.
Sydney, I want to ask you an iteration of that question, and that is, when you're surrounded by filmmakers who are successful because they largely have a point of view and they have a way of telling stories and they have a way of making movies themselves, how do you take away from that what it is that you want to do and not be overwhelmed by their point of view?
Well, I think one of the big learning experiences that I took away from that was, I think, sort of similar experience. Like, I found myself in this place trying to implement every single note I was getting, So, like, for example, I'd meet with a mentor and be like, I love character A, but character B isn't that good. Next person, character B is amazing, but character A is eh. And so I found myself in this place trying to sort of please all the people all the time. And I got to this place where I sort of realized, well, I can't control what anyone else thinks, but I can control what I think, And so if I'm going to bet that if I'm going to write something and I'm going to try to make it resonate with me, and so hopefully if it resonates with me, I'm going to bet that it'll resonate with someone else. And I think that was another important takeaway for me.
Hey, John, I'd like to add real quickly something to what David was saying about the labs having to do with the advisors. When I went to the advisors, colleagues of mine, to come and be mentors, what I told them, since they were going to be working for nothing and there was not going to be any financial gain in this experience, but I said, look, we all started somewhere. All these filmmakers that are coming in, we've had that experience ourselves as we started out. Don't you want to put something back? And by the way, if you don't get something out of this in the process, then the whole thing's not going to work. That it has to, the advisors in the process of working with these young filmmakers, if they don't learn something fresh and new, then the whole thing won't really work.
One of the things that's also important is that what happens in Sundance stays in Sundance, meaning that if you really nail a scene with your actors and your film crew and your editors, you don't get to take it with you. Why is that important, Bob, that what people do at the labs is not really kind of footage that they're going to bring back to the festival a couple years later, that everything is work product that stays behind?
I think it's to avoid them getting overambitious about the work and think about things that they shouldn't be thinking about. Like, I'm doing this work and I want to think where it's going to go, and I want to think who I'm going to give to and what studio and so forth. By eliminating that possibility, you're forcing the filmmakers to only think about the work that they're doing at that time.
David, I want to ask you about the people with whom you worked, and maybe Sydney as well. Were there people you worked in the casting department, editors, camera operators, that you ended up collaborating with down the line? Because essentially at the labs you're thrown in with a lot of people, some of whom you might have picked and some of whom you're going to be meeting on the first day of your set.
Well, in my case, I only went to the screenwriting lab, so I never worked with any of the technical crew that come to the directing labs, but I did wind up creating an amazing circle of support with my fellows that were there with me that year, who included Mario Heller, Ryan Coogler, Jonas Carpignano. It was like an amazing group of friends friendships we formed there, and we're friends to this day and support each other through watching each other's films, reading scripts, just talking, like, texting each other, just saying hello. It's just a really nice, circle of support that was all founded there in those 5 days that wound up feeling more like a month because you cram so much in, and that's been incredibly valuable to me.
Sydney?
Yeah, I mean, the labs were extremely helpful for me. I mean, this film I just did, Deidra and Laney Rapid Train, is I'm using the composer and the editor that I worked with in the labs in 2010, and so it's been, yeah, again, it was a great experience, like a communal experience, and we just sort of stayed in touch throughout the years, and it worked out.
David, is there a teachable moment you remember from the screenwriting lab that you still employ as you're working as a director today?
Yes. I mean, there's a lot, but the best one was the most practical, which was I was sitting down with Scott Frank and going over my script, and I was kind of explaining how certain parts of it were a little loosey-goosey because I figured we would just figure it out on set. And he's like, I know you think you will, but you won't. Like you're not going to have the time to. And I know you're going to tell me right now that you'll figure it out and you'll put it in the schedule, but you won't. And I was like, okay. And I kind of assumed that, no, we'll figure it out. And we got to set and realized, no, yeah, he was absolutely right. We do not have time to do any of that. And that, since then I've realized, like, you definitely need to have the script in a place where even if you want to elaborate upon it or improvise or anything like that, at the base it needs to be solid, and you need to have it in a place that you're happy with, because 9 times out of 10 you're not going to have time to try something out or to try something new or to go off in a different direction. And that was incredibly valuable advice. I didn't take that time, but now I will.
And Sydney, outside of finding a place to cry, what was the life lesson or the filmmaking lesson you took away from the labs?
I mean, again, I think it was, like I spoke earlier about, a mentor coming in and taking away my storyboards. And I think I was sort of pushed even further, and to the point where I was encouraged to actually do a scene with no pre-planning in place, and again, the intention being to push you out of your comfort zone, because there are situations when you're directing where you have to shoot from the hip. And so that experience for me was extremely valuable. Shooting a scene with relative prep and plan, but not to the extent I had been doing, and it was actually very freeing, and it has helped me in both of my feature films since. In this, because sometimes you land a scene, it's like, okay, where's the camera going? Boom, let's go.
David and Sydney, there's going to be a momentous change in the United States government in a couple of hours. As a filmmaker who pays attention to what is going on in the country and what an artist's response to those changes should be, how are you reevaluating what you're doing and the opportunities and maybe even obligations that you have as a storyteller over the next couple of years?
I mean, for me, it is something I'm still processing, but I do suddenly realize, as a filmmaker, you have a podium. I don't want to go turn that into a soapbox and shout from it. That's not I'm not interested in doing that, but I do realize that the things I say matter. And will be heard, and that there's some weight to that. I remember reading right after the election, there was an article in Filmmaker magazine about how every film is a political film, no matter what it is, and I really took that to heart. I was thinking about the films that I'm making now, the films I want to make in the future, and how I just put them in a slightly different context now. I'm seeing them in a slightly different light, and that doesn't change the fact that I'm not going to suddenly make a didactic, what was originally going to be an entertaining piece of filmmaking into a didactic political statement, but every film is political, and I think that I think it's important to think about things that matter to you in light of current events, and just make sure you're saying something that you feel is worth saying.
Sydney?
Yeah, I think David has an interesting point. I think for me, one of the things important with my approach to film is that it's important for me to not make it a soapbox, because the story is paramount. But I think for me, what I'm finding is that I'm trying to find stories that feel or have a sense of authenticity or truth to them. I think Barry Jenkins was commenting on Moonlight, and he was saying, I think his response was, my response to this current climate is to find films that ring true and have an authenticity to it, as to provide some sort of counter narrative, I guess. And I think that's again, I'm still processing myself, and that's sort of, I think, the core thing that I'm trying to grab onto right now.
Bob, in the next half of our conversation, John Cooper and KERI Putnam will talk about the festival and the Institute and their response. But as a filmmaker yourself, as an actor, as a producer, as a director, how would you answer that question in terms of how you are reevaluating the kinds of choices that you're going to make as an artist going forward?
Well, I think
Grab your mic.
I think I was affected by world events. For me, there are two things. One, what's my role going to be as an actor, as an artist in the mix? And then what's the story to be told? Well, I was very much affected when I was doing research for All the President's Men. I spent a lot of time with Ben Bradlee. I spent a lot of time with Woodward and Bernstein. And because I spent that much time with them, and I was able to travel with them as they were still doing their work, this was before the hearings, this was before their book, I saw how they worked and what their approach was as journalists. And somehow in my head, that sunk in as to how I would approach filmmaking as a journalist, telling a story. So going to the story idea, Ben Bradlee kept saying he would sit with these guys and they'd come in, they'd give him this and give him that. He said, cut that crap. You guys give me this, give me that. What's the story? What's the goddamn story? And he kept hitting that line, what's the story? And that sunk into me as well. Story is really, really important. You know, whatever's going on, fundamentally, what is the story? So those two things, what is the story, which means how important story is, and also approaching it kind of like a journalist, you know, to really dig in and dig deep. So those two things, I think, affected my filmmaking attitude.
We're going to now bring up KERI Putnam, the executive director of the Sundance Institute, and John Cooper, who's the director of the Sundance Film Festival. Sydney and David, thank you. Good luck with your films. We'll see you at the festival. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible from the audience. There are microphones out there. If you can make the questions as potentially succinct as possible, we'll try to get through as many as we can. But let's go ahead and get it rolling. Who is going to start with the first audience question? There are mics that are coming to you, so we'll try to move it around. Second row right here. Yeah.
While they're getting that, can I give
Yeah,
one
go ahead,
shout
Cooper.
out
Yeah.
just to Michelle Satter,
Yes.
who was out of that conversation.
Michelle, stand up
but
back there.
Of course, was the leader of the labs for all these years. Yay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is May, and I work for 30 Movies, and I'm based in London. So I know John when he went to London. So my question is for John and for Robert Redford. John, you're participating in the march Saturday, so I'd like to address again the issue of Trump, and what is the role of Sundance under Trump government, and how can creative communities continue to spread hope and tolerance to minorities and people who might be neglected for the following 4 years?
Well, I'll start off because you don't have an answer? It's okay. So, the idea is that presidents come and go. The pendulum swings. It swings back and forth. It always has. It probably always will. So we don't occupy ourselves with politics. We try to stay away from politics per se. And we stay focused on what are the stories being told by artists. So that's our main drive. And if politics comes up in the stories that the filmmakers are telling, so be it. But we don't play advocacy. We just are here to support the stories being told. And sometimes that gets confused, just like it got confused that Sundance was Park City. It's not. Park City is a place that we rent for 10 days. But Sundance, the heart and soul of our lab program and everything else, is about 40 miles away from here. So sometimes you have to say that over and over again to make it clear because it gets misunderstood. So the idea of us being involved in politics is just not so. We stay away from that. because we feel that it's far more important to support the storytellers and let them tell the stories. And if politics comes up in their stories, that's fine. But we do not take a position.
I think too, it's like you were asking what we were going to do in the next administration. I think we're going to do what we've always done, and that's where it starts. I think it's a bigger issue if you look at what independent film is in the world. If stories can change, what independent film does is show so much more of the human side of who we are and what we are. It's where you go to get the stories of the other people, the other places, the issues from a different angle. And I think that's really important, and I think we're going to stand behind our artists because they're the ones who do this, like Bob said, and just follow them and support them. Maybe they're going to need more support, and we're going to be there for that.
KERI?
Yeah, I just want to add, I think, to both of their points, I certainly agree, but I think it's also a time for us to really celebrate and affirm some of the founding values of Sundance, which obviously include the power of art and artists to kind of propel us forward as a society, but also free expression. All the documentary journalists out there, I think that that's an important value, and I think also the equality and the importance of all voices, the idea that diverse voices make a difference. And I think these things have always been a core part of Bob's founding vision and the programming here. And so in answer to your question, I think that is a piece of what we'll want to continue to affirm in these times.
And we've also developed and increased some of them. For example, let's just take documentaries. I always loved documentaries because as a kid, I remember seeing Emile D'Antonio's documentaries and Pennebaker Leacock, and I thought, this really hits me because they make you feel like you're there. You're actually there. It had such impact on me that when I got into filmmaking, I decided I wanted to employ that technique of using the documentary. In the meantime, I think what's happened is that documentaries have become more and more important as the news media world has shrunk into more of a soundbite world. Everything is so clipped and short, it gives you no time to digest, no time to contemplate. It's already moving on to the next event. So therefore, I felt that the documentaries are having a more important role than ever because it becomes like long-form journalism. It has a chance to really tell the story so the public can really digest it and see how they feel about it.
Who's got the next question? I'll go to you on the aisle right there with your hand up. Wait for the mic.
For Mr. Redford, could you talk a little about the emphasis on the environment at this year's festival and the New Climate program?
Well, obviously, my whole MO throughout most of my adult life has been focused on two things, nature and art. So art, we pretty well covered my involvement with that. On nature, and I'll see if I can shorten this, I grew up in Los Angeles, which in the end of the Second World War was a beautiful city. There were no skyscrapers, no freeways. It was a city I could be proud of. I came from a lower working class family. We didn't have a car, we didn't have much, but I could walk to the ocean and swim for free. And then I went away and I came back and it was like being too long at the fair. I came back in a place that so suddenly changed because development was totally out of control. And I realized that that's sort of the way it was going to be, that we were a development-oriented society. That's what made America strong. And that's the way it was going to be. But at some point, how far and how long can you develop before you have nothing left to develop? So that's when I began to get concerned about how we were savaging nature in order just to develop for short-term profit. And I think that began my political affiliation with the environment. And I also worked in Yosemite National Park, so I had that experience. So as time went on, I think that feeling just grew in me as I could see things shrinking all around me. And then I thought, well, is anybody thinking about future generations? Is anybody thinking about your kids, your grandkids, and what you're giving them? Are we going to leave them anything to work with? So that pretty well increased for me so that I became an advocate. I became, pretty pronounced with it. And so now I think you can look for yourself as to what's happening. And you can see whether you think it's important to stay working for the environment or not.
Cooper, do you want to talk about how the initiative came together in terms of New Climate?
Yeah, in some ways it was a perfect storm of sorts because it was in the summer. We were talking about, there was sort of a trickling off of environmental films making it through, getting into production. So there was a little bit of a dearth of, we'd had the Coves and the Blackfish changing policy, and it just sort of seemed to be trickling off. So we weren't panicked. We thought, let's do something at the festival where we start talking about this as a very real thing. Is there a reason? Is it from the funders? Is something not happening to make people aware? And then the films started coming in and it self-corrected, and now we have some great films. And so we were kind of at the right time, at the right place, and it's all going to be, great because of it.
Yeah, I want to add to that also, and part of that same impulse when we were seeing in our documentary fund
Right.
a lack of films on this topic. About a year ago at this time, we did a partnership with the Rauschenberg Foundation and several other funders to bring artists together with experts in this topic area to really explore what narratives could be created, what could be expanded around this topic. So on the Institute side as well, our program is by the same name, The New Climate, and this is just a great embodiment of it.
Who's got the next question? I'm going to try to move it around. Let's go down here. It's all totally random. I know this is not fair, but it is what it is. Maybe I'll just pick people with glasses. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, I was just wondering if you could comment. There seems to be a lot of major tech companies from Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, kind of getting into the content game. I'm just curious to hear some of your thoughts of how that's changing the independent film industry and ecosystem.
Well, they're bringing money to it. A lot of films are being made. And what I'm loving about this is that the films that they're supporting are independent films. There's not that pressure to do something, maybe because they have so much money already, but there's not that pressure. They're sort of into the stories like we are. So we're actually finding like-minded people. And Sydney's film here was already financed. She didn't have to go out, and she doesn't have to be here at this festival worrying about, is she going to repay her investors? She gets to float through it in the best way possible with people who believed in her.
Yeah, her movie was financed by Netflix.
Yeah.
Kerri, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think it is a great extra set of opportunities for filmmakers, and we're seeing it all over the place. But the global reach of those platforms and the possibility to be in front of audiences everywhere is both incredibly exciting, but also challenging from a marketing standpoint. How do you get your work on one of those platforms recognized? How does it rise up in the algorithm? And so I think that's a conversation I don't have the answer to, but I think that's a conversation that a lot of artists are going to be thinking about, especially independents who don't have the budget to do a big marketing campaign.
I'm going to go to this side of the room. I need a woman. I'm going to mix it around. Woman on this side of the room. Okay. No hands. Here in the red sweater. Yeah, I know. Saw you. And you're not wearing glasses.
Hi, I'm Ashley Kewish from KSL TV. Mr. Redford, you mentioned that the heart of the Sundance Film Festival it's not here in Park City. It's about 40 miles away. That being said, do you ever see a time where the Sundance Film Festival moves away from Utah? 20, 30 years down the road.
Well, I won't be around to think about it, but I mean, I don't
I'm
know.
going with him.
It's a very good question. It's a very appropriate question because I think, as you can see, any of you who have been here before, I think you can see the increased development that's going on here. And so the infrastructure is growing very quickly, and there's pretty soon it's going to be the only place to go is up. And so if that's the case, the real question is, will we be able to preserve a space for us in this city or not? I don't know. I know one thing is that we have a wonderful relationship with the city and the mayor and so forth, and they want to have us here because we brought some goodwill to the city. But the question is, the amount of people coming and the growth that's going on, at some point there's going to be a clash, and we're going to have to look at it. And I'm trying to get them to look at it now and not wait for that time when suddenly there's nowhere to go. So, but it is a question. One thing I would say about John, attention, that I can just add to this, attention between John and I. First of all, it's great that he's here. He's out on parole. But the fact that he's here with us today, I get to talk about the tension between us because I tend to push too fast and too hard. If I have an issue, and particularly on the environment, I'm going to push hard. And John takes a more conservative position and says, wait a minute, shouldn't we let the issue come to us? And I said, but couldn't we get out in advance? Couldn't we get out and create a category and be ahead of the game and say, we feel this is coming and so forth? And he said, we have to let it come first. So he's been right about that. I think I would have been wrong. And he's been right about letting the the category develop on its own, and so now it has. So now the environment is a category. So in a sense, it's come to us. We didn't go to it, and I think John deserves credit for that.
Does that mean fake news is a category next year?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's go here, right here with the Arsenal sweater, or the Arsenal scarf. Oh, I'm sorry.
You mentioned the NEA money that helped sort of seed Sundance Institute at the beginning. A lot of filmmakers here get their funding from groups like NEA, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and so on. All federal funding that are going to be in the crosshairs in a Republican administration. What would you advise filmmakers to do to either get around that or to keep pushing for that kind of funding to continue?
Yeah, crosshairs is probably an understatement. KERI, do you want to go with this one?
Yeah,
First?
I mean, right before we came up here, we read an article about the proposed funding bill and, you know, cuts that we made. I think your question, Sean, was what should filmmakers do? I don't think this is an issue just for filmmakers. I think the question of the NEA, the NEH, CPB, public television, radio, this is a human issue. It's about free expression, and it's about what role the arts play. From what I understand, the total amount of the cuts that are being proposed is about $741 million, which equates to about 0.016% of the federal budget. So it feels hard to imagine that being a real budget cut measure. It feels more like a statement about the arts. And I think what people can do, not just artists, but all people, whether they're educators or artists or parents or anyone, I think is to speak up for what role arts bring to our culture and our lives and to our ability to understand our world. So I think it's a critical issue for all Americans.
Cooper, do you have anything to add?
No, no, that's so well spoken. But I do think it's going to be, we're going to have to stay alert and have a voice, as, like you said, not just with filmmakers, but the American public. Only way anything's going to change is if the American public demands things that were taken away.
Who's got a question? I'll go fourth row. Yes, somebody with glasses again. Yes, you're right next to the microphone.
Jane House from Culture Map, and I wanted to follow up to you, John Cooper, about the expansion, the demand for tickets, and does Sundance's technology, is it robust enough to fuel, because I know the process this year was really frustrating for a lot of our readers.
Yeah, it was a tough year. But last year was tough, and the year before that was even tougher. So we're trying to get it together. It's going to take us some time. We had some setbacks. I just kept going through the office all the time. Remember Obamacare? That had everything with it, and those first 3 months were not pretty. And yeah, I feel bad that people suffered through this year, but we're going to get it together. We're determined to get it together.
Yeah, we put in a new system this year, and our teams worked so hard. We're such a complicated event, it requires a degree of customization, and we worked really hard to get it there, and we'll get there. We work with a new ticketing company this year, and we've done a lot of work with outside advisors and companies to try to improve upon it. We're going to continue to do that.
Yeah, right here. Yep.
My name is Jim Forrett. I'm the film editor of Westview News, and I'm an active blogger with Real Deal, Movies That Matter. I remember a few years ago you programmed a pro-nuclear energy documentary that really challenged me. And I just wanted to say out loud that there have been many instances here where what I expected Sundance to say no to, they said yes to. It was a quality documentary. My question has to do with history. We're entering a very dark period, and we know that in the 50s, what happened to artists who spoke up and stood up, and in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I'd like to know, since Sundance to me, his primary goal has always been not only storytelling, but nurturing of young filmmakers and old filmmakers, by the way, how you talk about amongst yourselves, if that's the way you want to answer it, or institutionally, about self-censorship out of fear.
Bob?
I think one of the things that, in sort of half answering that question and adding to something John was saying, I think we might, in terms of what's going on right now, and the feeling that a lot of people have of feeling fearful, and like things are getting dark and the darkness is closing in around them, you want to look for where the light is going to come. And I really do believe that in this current dialogue, it looks like a lot of things are going to be taken away, or tried to be taken away from us. And I think what that's going to do is galvanize the people. I really have total faith in that. Those people who weren't interested or figured, who cares, what, are now going to realize they're going to be directly affected, and they're going to step up. And I hope and I think that it's going to be followed by a movement, and a movement is going to go against whatever choice is made to cut things away that affects people. The people are going to rebel against that, and a movement will be created. And I think that's very, very healthy.
I want to go toward the back of the house. Yeah, way, way back there. I see you. Mike's coming.
She's wearing glasses.
Unconscious bias.
With the theme of glasses. Kim Fisher, ABC4 here in Utah. We've talked about climate, we've talked about growth. What a lot of people here probably don't realize is that in the state of Utah during the month of January, we see some of the worst air we'll see throughout the entire year. So what I've noticed you guys did here in Park City with the electric buses working with the city is awesome. But are you guys talking about doing anything between Park City and Salt Lake City to kind of cut down on emissions?
Helicopter, yeah. No, I just found out some amazing things about this city, Park City, and I can barely speak to it because it was a little over my head, as a lot of things are. But just that they have the most rigorous plan for cutting the carbon footprint in this. I think it's Denmark and here, there's the city, Copenhagen maybe, and here are the far most plan of anybody in the world right now, and I didn't know that, so I really earned a lot of respect for this city. So I think they're trying to create something that other people are going to copy, and so I hope that we're going to feel that in the future.
And I rented a Prius at the airport. It's in a ditch by the 80 and 15 interchange where it's skidded off the road.
We'll get rid of that for you.
Glasses on the head, but not on the eyes, right here.
Hi, Mr. Redford. Jada Yuan from New York Magazine. You talked about being inspired by All the President's Men, and I was curious, in the dark times that we've been talking about right now, how does this compare to what you saw with Nixon?
Well, there's an interesting thing that happened for me that made me, it was a realization that made me sad about something being lost, having to do with our country. And what it was I was asked to do a revisit for All the President's Men, and my first inclination was no, we've been there, done that. That's a point that's been made. It was made a long time ago, 1974, 5. That time has gone by, and things have gone downhill since then. But rather not visit it. There's nothing new to be said. Maybe it should just be looked at like a museum piece. This happened once upon a time. And they kept pressing me they pushed me harder. No, can't you revisit it? Can't you revisit it? I said, well, let me look at some archival footage. So when I was looking at that, I saw something that really stunned me. And that was when they had the hearings. You remember, probably before you were born, but when they had hearings about the investigation against Nixon and Haldeman. And so they were questioning John Dean, who had worked for the president, and they were grilling him. And what I saw was the panel was made up precisely of both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, all acting as one, trying to get to the truth. And that hit me like a ton of bricks when I revisited. I said, oh, so in other words, there was a time. And maybe there's a new title that should come out that says, there was a time. There was a time when two sides did work together. That's what makes you depressed about today.
Bob, I'm going to take the last question for myself. We started by talking about the lab. We would not be here without the lab and the festival. When you look at the festival and what happens over the next 10 days, what gives you the greatest amount of pleasure? I suspect it's not a bidding war or people lining up to get a Patagonia jacket at a swag suite, but as somebody who started it.
Canada Goose, Jack.
Canada Goose, I'm sorry. In the Acura Lounge, brought to you by Chick-fil-A. But when you are, sounds like a college bowl game now. But in terms of the personal satisfaction of what you started so many years ago at the lab and what you see this week, if you were to take away something, what is it that you take away? What gives you satisfaction at the end of the festival?
Well, putting aside the excitement and the value of seeing people coming, because in the very beginning in 1985, we weren't sure anyone was going to come. So seeing the increase in the crowds, that feels good. I think probably the thing that excites me the most is to see the initial idea of trying to create something that would give an opportunity to new artists to tell their stories in a way and also have a place to go, that we've created that. So when I look at the festival, I don't look at the infrastructure or anything like that. I just look at the people who are coming to see films that might not ever have been able to be seen.
Well said. KERI, Bob, John, thank you. Thank you guys for showing up. Have a great festival.
John Horn.